Welcome everyone to Numbers Therapy episode 15. And today's episode is titled The Rising Web 2, Web 3 Gaming Clash. So I think we have a pretty good sense of at least part of what we're going to be talking about today. First, a brief note from a sponsor. If your parents have no idea what you're doing in Web 3, NFTs, tech, social media, the Generational Bridge newsletter has got your back. Every Saturday, smart, funny, enjoyable newsletter goes out teaching parents and boomers about the main trends and implications. The result, your parents don't ask you the questions and they believe in what you're doing more. So special access for MVHQ members. Sign up your parents now, thegenbridge.co.co/MVHQ. It's the best thing they'll, and maybe even you'll read all week. So with that said, couple initial announcements that we're going to kick off with. So first off, we are officially live and coming to, and actually live on Spotify right now and other podcast channels. So this is officially something, and definitely go check it out. Follow us. We are officially on the move. And secondly, applications for future guests for Numbers Therapy are live and will be sent around in MVHQ. So, we want the best and the brightest you got. And they, in turn, will have a lot of fun, pick up some pretty cool exposure as well. Like I said, we're on Spotify. So if you have somebody in mind, please make sure to look out for that and put their name and a bit of description in as well. And look out for that message from Poop, or, can even DM him or myself as well. So for framing purposes, right, the purpose of Numbers Therapy is to talk through the macro stuff and bring on and showcase our experts in here. More specifically, so that everyone understands how all of the big pieces fit together, make better decisions with NFTs and other investments using a balanced perspective, learn about or from some of our people in here to get the different perspectives, and then, of course, learn about different areas and opportunities that exist out there as well, and different ways of thinking. The reminder I give every time, as anybody who's listened knows, is we always have different levels in here for the live show. So if anybody has a question, has something they don't understand, has a term that they don't know, an acronym that they don't know, please make sure to drop the question into guest questions. Somebody else probably has the exact same question that you have. And we need to ensure that as a community that everybody's along for the full ride. It's really important. And then lastly, an important note and disclaimer, which is none of what you hear in here is financial advice. It's all opinions. And so without further ado, and on to today's guest and episode. So as you know from recent episodes, we've been traveling around the world a lot and have two main dimensions we've been attacking every episode, from the geographic angle and then also from the functional expertise angle. And so starting next week, we'll be heading majorly international again, hitting on some of our best people from around the world. Last week, we took a road trip around the U.S., and today we'll be continuing that U.S. road trip, scooping up some lobster and some chowder in the greater New England area before taking off on our figurative international flight from Boston Logan next week. So the guest we have on today is a really cool guy that I feel like we always love hearing from. He's a very hardworking dude and has really refined his craft, specifically in the gaming space, starting originally with Web 2 and adapting, of course, in Web 3 as well. So him and I got to spend a bunch of time, perhaps too much, on a rainy boat in New York at NFT NYC, where we got to talk about a bunch of topics, including gaming and other NFT topics. So with some recent news that came out in the gaming world and the fact that we're in a quieter market, this tweener bear time, I thought it was the perfect time to get his updated perspective on gaming. And I want to clearly call out also, I'm not a gamer myself. So for anybody listening who is not a gamer, there's still a ton of meat here for you. Gaming, as we know, is one of the biggest possible use cases of NFTs. It's an estimated $125 billion industry currently. So even if you're not a gamer per se, as an investor, just understanding, or a trader, understanding that context and nuance, just very, very crucial, of course. So in addition to this, functional gaming expertise that our guest has picked up, we might even be able to get both a New England taste of the NFT scene, plus he might even have a perspective on Portugal as well, which I know he has a lot of roots and connections to also. But overall, I will promise this will make for a very interesting conversation today. And I'm quite excited to have our guy on here and have him as a friend. So without further ado, please welcome Peerless, everybody. Peerless, what is going on?
How's it going? Quite the introduction, man. I'm impressed.
It's getting meaty these days. It's getting
Nice. Nice. I like it. I like it. Very spicy.
Awesome.
Yeah, man. I'm excited to be on here with, the MVHQ crew.
Yeah, really excited to have you on, man, and really excited to dig into some of these topics today. I'm excited to hear your perspective. So, where we always like to start on the show first, usually, and let's start with your pre-Web3 background. So, what were you doing before you had even heard about NFTs? Where was your time? Where was your attention, your mission, your goals, things like that? Whatever you feel comfortable sharing, just to kind of frame your mentality pre-NFT land, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a gamer, right? So that's always been like top of mind. But professionally wise, I mean, I've been in like the sales industry for a really long time. But working for like either like a retail establishment or a corporate world, there's a lot of like constraints on what you can do and so forth. So I would say about like 3 years ago now, I decided to just leave the 9 to 5 world and do my own thing. And what that meant was I wanted to pursue like e-commerce. So, kind of set up a little business. I had some friends that were into the whole like reselling business, scalping, whatever you want to call it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because, with COVID, right? In like 2020, a lot of supply chains got like annihilated. So it was really hard to get a lot of stuff, right? So the prices of a lot of things got impacted. So that, drove up the opportunity for the whole like reselling aspect of things. And then, a lot of you guys may or may not be aware, but, what was it? What's his name? Logan Paul, right? He did the whole Pokemon thing and whatnot, and Pokemon was popping off. So, yeah, I met a buddy through gaming, and his name is Brawlers. You guys may or may not be familiar with.
We've heard of him.
Yeah. So we got into we were chatting. We got into reselling. So, and I wasn't just reselling, right? I had accounts with toy distributors and consumer electronics and as well. So I was buying a lot of stuff at like wholesale price as well. But anyways, I did that for a while and really successfully as well. I think I was on track to doing maybe like 100,000 sales a month. So I was moving like a crazy amount of product. But similar to like and the NFT space where you have like these alpha groups and stuff, the reselling, I mean, you'd have a lot of what you would call cook groups. And in one of those groups, there was a guy called the Grape Dutch who was kind of leading the space in like Pokemon reselling. Funny.
We've heard of this gentleman as well.
Yeah. So, was there for quite a while. And, one of the calls was like, hey, let's, check out this NFT thing called Top Shot. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting. I move a lot of trading cards, right? So, and this is like a digital trading card. So it's like, oh, this is kind of cool. It was very innovative. And I was like, oh, and it just kind of made sense for me because I was already in that space. I was already in the collectible business and so forth, right? Not particularly in sports per se, but yeah, tried it out for a few months and, went really well. And this is when Top Shot was popping off back in like December, January, something like that.
Yep.
And then you know, there was a couple like NFT stuff, nothing crazy. And then he's like, "Hey, check out this NFT game." And I was like, "What NFT game? What's this all about?" And the game was called Guild of Guardians. And I was like, this is really neat. This is really interesting because I've always like I mentioned, I've always been an avid gamer and kind of been all over the place. And I was like, this, in my opinion, I thought it was a really neat idea. The fact that you own the game assets or whatever, and I was and potentially flipping opportunities. So got into that, and the rest is history. Kind of from there, to be honest, I kind of slowly started doing more and more NFT trading as I was doing my e-commerce stuff. And at one point, it just kind of flipped where I wasn't doing e-commerce anymore. I was just pretty much doing NFT flipping 24/7. Like that was my new day job.
Yeah.
So yeah, a bunch of great trades later. My good friend Grape Dutch and Nustra, bought into this awesome alpha group called MVHQ, and I've had to follow.
I feel like a
yeah.
lot of people who are listening right now, dots are getting connected in the background for whatever it's worth. So definitely, I did not know that background personally. I've heard, of course, that many people came from like a flipping background, Web 2 product flipping background, but I did not know that it was, 3 or 4 of you guys that were connecting in the group, and then it kind of migrated here. That is super interesting to hear. And so a question for you that kind of jumps out, which is, if you can remember back, like pre Web3, right, pre NFTs, and you came from the gaming world, right? You already liked gaming. You spent a lot of time. Had you already identified and like, was this a real issue about the ownership of assets in games? Was this something actually talked about before NFTs and before Web3 came out? Is this something that was on your mind already, or is it more like you heard about Guild of Guardians, an example you said? You knew that there was going to be possibly an NFT application. You're like, that might make some sense, right? Afterwards, was this a thing before that you were already thinking about, or that people were thinking about, in your opinion?
I don't necessarily know if it was thought about as far as like a one-to-one thing. Before the internet existed, were people talking about the internet and whatever. It's all like an innovative space. I know for a fact that, I've dumped a lot of money in some games that I've invested a lot of time in, and I don't play those games anymore, right? So that's when, that investment in my entertainment is gone, right? But it's not necessarily gone, right? I got something out of it. I got the entertainment aspect out of it, but I think it was when I got introduced to NFT gaming, that's kind of the first thing that came to my mind was, hey, like I play a lot of Rocket League. Rocket League is a free game. Like you don't need to pay for it, right? But I've thrown probably a couple $100 at Rocket League. And it's just, I like the game and I want my car to look cool, I guess. You know what I'm saying? And so do a lot of people, you know what I'm saying? Like, so I thought that was but eventually, maybe I won't play Rocket League anymore. And those couple $100 I, threw at the game is just, gone in the abyss. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah, that's super interesting, because I guess the related question, right, is, for yourself and even beyond, it sounds like gamers were not that unhappy before, right? Like it was kind of the situation where maybe you invested a little bit, but you were investing because you had pride and you wanted to, build a better account and have progress and all that good stuff. And it was just was, right? That like at some point you might not be interested anymore, but for the time that it was there, like you said, you have entertainment, you got to maybe flex in the game a little bit by having better, gear or whatever else it was. And it just wasn't useful anymore. No different than if you have like a Nintendo game and you don't want to use Nintendo anymore, right? Like you got entertainment, you got value, you up leveled, and you're on your way, right, to whatever the next is.
Sure.
So it sounds like that wasn't a real issue originally. Is that about right?
Whether or not it was an issue? No, I don't think it was an issue. Yeah. I mean, I guess it kind of it depends on like I feel like gaming just has so many different type of examples. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? I think in your traditional gaming sense, no, but maybe in your like new upcoming kind of gaming, some people may have seen it as an issue. So, for example, like mobile pay to win games.
Yep.
Some of you may or may not be familiar with a new game called Diablo Immortal. And I mean, the amount of money some people throw at it is pretty immense. So, in that regard, I feel like some people, would potentially have an issue. It's like, hey, I threw all this money at this thing and now it's gone thousands of dollars instead of 20, 30, maybe a couple $100 over the course of years. Some people are spending $1,000 in like a month on this game,
What's really interesting to me, by the way, about what you said, and I hadn't taken time to like think through this before, but if you have like a Web 2 game that existed in the past, right? And you just gave an example of one, I forget what you gave before, but you spend several $100s in the game, right? And all of a sudden you're not playing it anymore, and you're like, well, shit, I'd love to be able to recover those few $100s because I'm not playing the game anymore, right? Like in theory, that would of course be nice, right? I mean, it's pretty logical. But what's interesting and kind of struck me about that is I would have to guess for like most people, because it's like a network effect based thing, at the point at which you decide you don't want your account anymore, you're done playing, and therefore it would be nice to recoup my $300. I wonder, like, is there even a market for it anymore? And this is not a Web 3 question, right? Like, this is a Web 2 question also. It's the same principle that applies, which is, would anybody even buy your $300 account at that point on average? Because everybody's come to the same conclusion, more or less, which is like, this game just isn't that interesting anymore, and I'm on to the next game. Is that possibly a problem that might exist? That's, again, Web 2, Web 3 agnostic. I mean, exist in any case where it's hard to do something with your account at the point at which you actually want to do something with it and just sell it.
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, because I feel like if you look at traditional gaming, the retention on a lot of these games are not very long. Like a lot of games come and go, and people kind of forget about it. But I mean, from analyzing games and being a gamer, like mobile game retention, like games like Raid Shadow Legends, Summoner's War, what's the new one? Genshin Impact. Games like this have much better retention rates than your traditional, like I guess AAA game or like box games, just because of like the constant just updates and almost seasonal aspects of things and so forth. So I to go back to your question, I feel like in some cases yes, in some cases no. I know for a fact, like there's definitely like black markets where like you can sell your account to like maybe a new player or something, or in some games it's advantageous to have multiple accounts, so maybe there's a person wanting to buy another account just to kind of like get a competitive edge against other people.
Mm-hmm.
But those black markets definitely exist, especially with games like RuneScape, and the black market on RuneScape is massive. And people like in third world countries actually, I don't know if they do now, I'm a little bit out of the loop, but people are making a living out of selling like RuneScape gold and whatnot.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I feel like that in and of itself, right, the fact that you can only sell it at the overall account level, right, presents the issue that exists, right? Some people maybe don't want the whole account, they just want pieces of it, and it should be more fluid. Sure. So I guess conceptually it makes sense. Something you just hit on too, Peerless, that I thought was interesting is, some games being designed for retention and some games not so much. Like, can you pull that apart a little bit more? And I don't know if you have a way to like, that you can help make it clear for people or give people a way to think about that. Like, what makes a game that really lasts, in your opinion, versus why are even some of these AAA games, like you're saying, just not lasting? Why are they fizzling out? Like, can you dissect that for us a little bit and like make it clear in your mind, from your mind and your perspective, like why you think some games last and some games don't?
That's a really good question. I don't think I have like the full answer for that. I mean, a few things come to top of mind. I mean, some games are just strictly not designed for retention. Maybe they're just like a solo player experience, and you play the game and you beat it, and that's it. Maybe there's some like achievements you can gain out of it or whatever. Usually games that try to stick around are generally like a multiplayer experience. So, like Valorant or PUBG or, FPS games or just, general PV player versus player experiences are usually going to last a while, as long as the developers have a well balanced game and it's smooth and so forth. I think a good example is like of maybe reducing retention is like PUBG. Like if anyone played a lot of these like battleground FPS games, I mean, you would know that like the controls of PUBG comparatively to its competitors are dog shit. And that's something they should have paid more attention to earlier on. I mean, the movement's just very bulky and it just doesn't feel right when you're playing the Call of Duty version and so forth.
Is that quick question on that actually? Is something like that? Like, I know controls is just like one dimension, right? Of course, like a good game, but something like controls as an example, or even structure, like is that correctable, right? Or is this like from, let's just say from like an investor? We have a bunch of traders, investors in here, that kind of a thing. If you identify a game early on that where like the controls are bad or some other element is bad, is that correctable over time? Or if it's just not good, but there are components that are good, you're just going to wind up getting squashed over time, and that should be something that people watch out for as a result.
I guess it depends on the studio, but it's definitely like something that can be improved upon. One Web 2 game that I've been following closely is an upcoming MMO called Ashes of Creation. They've had a like alpha, like a closed alpha before, and you could watch that, and the movement was a little bulkier, and if you watch recent like development updates, I mean it's completely different than what it was half a year ago. So they've been, but it's a game that's also actively being improved on. I mean, I'm not a developer per se, so I'm not like an authority on answering this question appropriately. But I mean, I would have to guess the short answer would be yes, but I don't know how. I mean, I feel like it depends on the game, and how much it would take to improve upon those aspects.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes complete sense. So, I mean, it's good to at least have in people's minds, right, that some of these things are flexible, and maybe a follow-on that we'll have, like you're suggesting, is we get somebody who's like a gaming coder or from the technical side of things to be able to dig into that piece. That'd be interesting. From like an investor and a trader standpoint, it'll be interesting to understand that detail as well. But
yeah,
related,
yeah, just to kind of harp on the subject a little bit, like at the end of the day, like the game just needs to be good. So like a lot of Web3 promises like a pretty picture, but it like the idea and thought could be there, but like if the game's not good, it's just not good. You know what I'm saying? So I think early on in Web3 we saw, and I'd love to do like the whole air quotes game, like games, right? Is we saw a lot of play to earn quote unquote games. And in the traditional sense, Web 2, I mean, you would never play those games outside of Web 3. Like I just straight up never. Like it wouldn't even be a conversation. Like if there wasn't crypto involved, the game would have like 2 downloads on Steam or something. You know what I'm saying? Like it just would not be played. So
we can hear your air quotes, by the way, even without you saying it. We can hear and feel your air quotes there.
Yeah. So I think we've kind of passed that point a bit. I think early on it was innovative and, in my opinion, more of like history in the making kind of deal. So I think like Etherworks is a prime example, but they've kind of like they've gone down a really good path. So originally Etherworks was a good example of that, of like, hey, this is a history piece, and a lot of its value is derived on it being like a first to do this thing. And then there was a lot of like other projects that tried to do similarly, and they did well as well. But like today, outside of market conditions, okay, like let's ignore market conditions for a second. If a game maybe similar to Etherworks or that kind of style like launched today in the condition that like Etherworks launched, it wouldn't do nearly as well. Like not even close. So, but with that being said, I think the Etherworks team is rock solid, and they've been moving really well, and they've created pretty much like an indie style game from what they've done, and they're constantly building. So that's great. That's really good to see, and that's like a very bullish thing to see on like a team, but to be honest, unfortunately it's rare in this space to see a solid team like that. So the point I'm trying to make here is that I feel like a lot of people have been bearish on Web3 gaming, and that's mainly because people are just trying to do the same thing that like Etherworks did and some other like Wolf Games, stuff like that. But like that ship has sailed, in my opinion. Like you might make some quick money because generally speaking, these games are like have some Ponzi-nomics to them. But they're not even gonna come close to testing the test of time kind of deal. So the way I'm looking at investing or buying into Web3 gaming right now is like just remove crypto completely. Just let's not make it like a marketing thing, right? And it's like, okay, like would I play this game?
Yeah.
If it was just like a game.
Yeah. So you're hitting on something, I think really important to call out. In my observation, maybe my slight advantage here is not being a gamer, possibly, but like to me, it looks like there's 2 really distinct segments of people that exist, and it's possible that somebody could be both of these. I just want to call out, but like the 2 distinct segments are people who want quote unquote air quotes, like you said, games, but it's really just about the dollars and the ROI, right? And then separate from that are just gamers, right? And if they can happen to get a little bit of return out of it, great. But it's more about like how good is the game, right? And then later we can deal with economics and all that good stuff, right? Yeah. For that second group, that the traditional gamers group, something that we've heard, quite often. I've certainly heard it quite often. Is like they do not care a lot about owning NFTs. Like that seems to be the party line that exists. Do you agree with that? Like more traditional Web2 gamers, do you think that's true?
I both agree and disagree with it simultaneously. So I'm like, I've been deep in the gaming space and I'm still in it. Like I watch popular Twitch streamers daily. One of the Twitch streamers I like to watch is Asmongold. He's probably one of like the most popular Twitch streamers out there. So if you're somewhat familiar with Twitch, you may be familiar with him. And the reason why I bring him up specifically is he talks about NFTs semi-frequently. Like the subject comes up very often on his stream, and he's avid on like, NFTs bad, stuff like that. And you look at his chat when they're talking about it and everybody's like scam kind of deal. So like let's talk about that for a second, and I guess why. I think on the surface, right? Generally speaking, outside of gaming, just NFTs as a whole it's Scam City, right? And it's really easy for like a few bad actors to just, put a bad image over the whole thing, right?
Mhm.
I mean, last night was a great example. We had like some degen mint, and one of the MVHQ members minted, and he got his MVHQ pass like transferred. It was a draining. You'd go on the website and it would drain your wallet.
Yep.
So yeah, that kind of puts like a bad, like, and then that kind of puts a little bit of a bad reputation on NFTs as a whole, right? Not just gaming. It's like, oh, NFTs scam, right? So that's like one of the first things people think about when they hear NFTs. The other aspect is most of the use cases we've seen so far, or the studios implementing NFTs into gaming, have been in some sort of like pay to win aspect. And I feel like most of your traditional gamers don't are completely against the whole pay to win thing. And what do I mean when I say pay to win? I mean, you throw money at the game and you have an advantage.
Right.
I think your traditional gamers completely opposed to that. So I think in a simplified fashion, I think those two things consume the traditional gamer, and they're like, no, we don't like NFT games. There's just those two aspects. I don't think it matters at all, to be perfectly frank.
Yeah.
I think to be honest, like, your traditional gamer is actually the minority in the gaming space as a whole.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's more of like old school gamer thought process, in my opinion. The gamers that have been around for a while, but like new school, like, look at like, there's just so many examples. Like, for starters, mobile gaming is far superior to like your traditional console or PC gaming. They have the largest market share, and most mobile games are littered with like microtransactions and pay to win aspects and so forth. And I think as far as mobile games concerned, I feel like it's more of your like average consumer. It's more accessible, so it hits a much wider audience. And they're not they could be some traditional gamers mixed in, but I think it's just, more of your average person playing games. And I think your average consumer, they they're okay with paying for convenience. I feel like there's a lot of games where, like, and maybe this is just bad game design, but that initial like grinding aspect of a game, right? Because a lot of games are designed where you kind of like build up, right? And for me personally, for my gaming experience, I really like getting to the end and doing like what you would call end game content, I guess. That's where like the real fun, you can kind of compete and so forth. So some people just be like, hey, like, let me throw a credit card at this thing, skip the bullshit, and get to the good stuff. So, and they're totally okay with that. So, and going back to one of my previous examples from like Diablo Immortal, I mean, I think they made something like $100 million like the first month or something like that. I'm pretty confident on those numbers, but I could be off a little bit. And it's just it's extremely profitable business model to create like a pay to win game. But just giving like a completely different example now. One game that I've been really heavy into, Web3, is Big Time. And I think Big Time's play to earn model is fantastic for your traditional gamers. There's the game is completely free to play. You don't need to pay anything to play the game once it's fully released. And even now, it's really easy to get their Ruby Pass, which is free. You just hop on like somebody streaming big time for a little bit, and they're doing like giveaways nonstop. Like it's if you wanted to play big time, you could easily get a free Ruby Pass. It's not very hard. So with that being said, I think the perfect recipe for a good Web3 game is a free-to-play game like what Big Time is doing, because it hits you, both your traditional gamers and like non-traditional gamers, where it's free to play. You're not reducing anything from the game by throwing money at it or anything like that, and it's just cosmetics, very similar to, I guess, Fortnite, where you're just throwing money at cosmetics if you want to, but it doesn't detract anything from the gameplay experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seemed, I mean, it's, for anybody who's playing, right? I mean, you kind of naturally fall into one of two camps, right? Like either you have time or you have money or you have both, right? So it's like pretty logical that you'd be able to expend the one that you want to get to where you want to get to, right? Because they have two segments plus or minus that they're dealing with there. I wonder if like part of the like you gave the example of like the streamer who is super anti and like why they were super anti, but I imagine like part of what's happening there too is people don't get views, of course, from having like unpolarized content, right? So it could be like a little bit of hyperbole there too, in terms of like what their opinion is, when in reality it's probably more balanced. And maybe they're also either took the time but are just being a little bit out there, or didn't take the time to understand like the pros of what's going on. But it seems like if they did, like it's a positive outcome either way, right? Put time or you put money or you put both. It opens up the economy. It enables it so that people can earn things, right? Because the paying people are supporting the unpaying people, let's say, and helping ensure the company makes money, because that has to happen, obviously. I don't know. It seems pretty logical to me, but I wonder if like that like streaming perverse incentive exists too. And therefore it's like, it gets brought up a lot that, Web 2 people, traditional gamers don't like NFTs, when in reality it's just either they haven't studied enough or they're just trying to create content, right?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, there's never going to be a game that is made for everybody. It's just, that's not a thing. So you're going to have games for your people who are not traditional gamers and just want something to play, and maybe they, throw some money at it, skip the initial stuff or whatever. Those type of games, traditional gamers, usually they stay away from. The reason being is it creates imbalance. So like, let's say I'm 15 years old and I'm playing a game and I don't have a day job to throw $100 at this game, and someone else does, they have a competitive advantage against me. And when it comes to player versus player, it's not fun for that 15-year-old, because they're just getting wrecked by a person who's throwing a credit card at the game. So it's no longer a fun experience for them. So they're going to find games that are like, okay, free to play friendly, right? Or maybe it's just a box fee, right? When I mean box fee, I mean you throw $60 at the game and that's it. Microtransactions would typically not be non-existent or cosmetic only. So, and that's okay, and you can have both. Like, like, there's no problem with that whatsoever.
Is that where we're headed then, in your opinion? Like, are we just going to head towards this two-segment approach, basically, where, like you're saying, in either case, the expectation is going to be that the game is really awesome, right? It doesn't matter if it's, with a crypto element behind it or not, right? In either case, it has to be an increasingly good game. We've kind of more or less proven that so far, right?
I mean, I think...
There. But is it just like, are we heading to, Poker Stars or some kind of online situation where you have two segments, one that wants to play for high stakes and one that doesn't? And is that where we're going?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's just going to echo the current gaming industry, but then provide a better user experience for some people. I mean, that's all it really comes down to. I think a lot of people who are ignorant on Web3 don't, like I mentioned earlier, they're just they just have that whole like scam aspect ingrained in their mind. And as I mentioned earlier as well, it's a lot of these games are designed with Ponzi-nomics involved. I feel like Axie is a great example. But, where only the first people to enter are really making any money and everybody else is pretty much fucked. Or, so yeah, it just puts kind of like, bad rap on it. But I mean, you're going to have that with anything. But yeah, I think it's, that's kind of where it's at. I think you'll still have some like, I guess, quote unquote games out there that will still do well. And I think generally speaking, those are just kind of like you have a good Web3 community and then you just throw like a game on top just to keep people busy, I guess. But the value on those NFTs is not the game, it's the community. You know what I'm saying? I think a good example of that would be like Cool Cats, right? Mm-hmm. Where they have a game, but like the game is not like 20% of the value of Cool Cats. You know what I'm saying? Like people don't buy into Cool Cats because of the game, right?
So the real value, in your opinion, is like the engagement mechanism that exists, the ability to maybe get some extra stuff, the ability to maybe flex in the community to some extent that you got to a certain level, and it's not so much about like the game being awesome necessarily. Is it kind of those things?
100%. I mean, you also have games like DeFi Kingdoms, where it's like, I guess, a way to like invest in crypto but make it fun. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not really designed to be like an awesome epic game like your Web 2 game like you would typically play, but you're like kind of investing in crypto and playing a game at the same time. And like, sweet. And there's a market for that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And there always will be. But I mean, me personally, I'm not a very good crypto investor, so I'm gonna just kind of stay away from that kind of stuff until maybe I learn some more. But yeah, I have a strong opinion. Like I think a lot of people who are bullish on gaming that are not bullish anymore. I think the reason being is the play to earn that we've seen do well in the past is not doing well anymore. And I think people are just kind of over that type of play to earn model. I think the play to earn model that is doing well and will do well is a solid game with good tokenomics.
Sure.
I think Big Time is kind of there. It's a solid game with so far. I mean, they don't necessarily have a token, but it's tough. Like for anyone who invested in Spaces back when I did and still holding, I'm sorry for you because the value of those Spaces have tanked like bad. But I don't think that I don't think you should pay attention to that per se as far as whether or not Big Time is going to be profitable. I, in my opinion, from what I've seen, I think it's going to be extremely profitable game if done right.
Sure.
Yeah. So from my perspective, from what I've seen from their team, is they're just like hungo focused on creating a solid game, and the value on the NFTs and the Spaces and so forth, it is what it is. They're not trying to control the value or anything. They're just like, hey, we're going to make a cool game and and then the NFTs are just like whatever the market decides it is. And as far as the market availability, like the scarcity is concerned, it just comes down to, the demand, right? Like, is there more players trying to get into the ecosystem? All right, we'll increase the number of NFTs so more players can play. Like that's all it comes down to.
Yeah.
So it's dangerous to invest early in those type of games. So like the first sign I saw when I invest, with Big Time was when they did their second space sale. It might as well have been, there was like a quote unquote limit on how many spaces were available, but it might as well have said infinite, to be perfectly frank, because the amount of spaces available purchase were significantly higher than demand. And that's a good thing and bad thing. Bad thing for us who are buying into it, right? Because the value's not going to really go up. But it's a good thing for them as far as like the game is concerned. They're getting as many people as possible into the ecosystem. So I think, when looking at a game like that, if you're trying to throw money at it or something, I would wait until like you have the full picture. Like, I have a few spaces now, but I'm not throwing any more money at spaces specifically until I know like what my ROI looks like on spaces. Like how much tokens can I potentially earn on a daily basis with those tokens? What can I do with those tokens? How many NFTs will I be able to craft and so forth, based off of like, a player playing 8 hours a day, gaining X amount of tokens, blah, blah, blah. Can I feasibly get my money back in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, so forth? Until I have that math, like, I'm not throwing any money at that and any similar games to that. But, and I mentioned specifically with studios that just are like 95% focused on just the game, and the NFTs are kind of an afterthought. In my opinion, Big Time is that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, a studio should view people playing. There's, in my opinion, people buying into a game. There's you could be in like one of two buckets. You could be like the game, like a player, right? Or you're a retail investor. And in most cases, from what we've seen so far, like this is an arbitrary percentage, but I feel like I'm not too off here. I feel like 80% or something are like retail investors that are throwing money at these games, and they're not actually playing those games.
Yeah. So we're gonna get back to in a second.
Go ahead.
Dissecting Web3 games and like categorizing them. And I know a couple of people in here also asked about gaming ecosystems and other side things like. So we're gonna get back to that in a second.
Okay.
I want to hit on one question first, though. That's the one I'm probably most curious about. That I think would be interesting for everyone to hear, which is, and I'll give some background, right? Like the recent news with Minecraft, right? And full disclosure here, and making fun of myself, I've heard of Minecraft, of course, but I had to look up exactly what it was leading into today. There are 141 million effing users on Minecraft. It generated 161 million in 2021 alone. I also didn't know it literally looked like Sandbox, which I participated in several times. And I also didn't know that Microsoft owned them, to be honest with you. So all facts. But what exactly happened there? And you and I talked about this outside. Why were you not surprised? It sounds like you were not surprised about what happened. So why were you not surprised in terms of what happened?
I was not surprised whatsoever. The moment I saw NFT worlds popping up, critters and so forth, the first thing that came to my head was this is a really dangerous investment. Mainly because Microsoft can come out of nowhere and be like, no. And then you just fucking wrecked. it's really dangerous. Like, I mean, you look at like the article, right, that was written from Microsoft, and if anybody's interested, I'll post the article right here in office hours chat. It's not a very long read. It's like half a dozen paragraphs. Generally speaking, they're like, hey, NFTs is creating an atmosphere that creates an unbalanced experience for players, and it goes against what we believe in. So that's what they chalked it up to, I guess. I think that was like a PR thing, from my opinion. And I think it just comes down to money, and then also, potential like legality issues, and they just don't want to be exposed to that. So that's kind of my opinion on that aspect. I think it's really dangerous for any game to rely on another, I guess, like Microsoft. I mean, I feel like Minecraft is really similar to like Sandbox. People draw that comparison a lot, right? Where it's, Minecraft is a game, but it's also like a tool to create an experience, which is really cool, right? So like with Minecraft, like you can create like private servers, and there's a lot of like open source aspect. You can go into the code, create like your own items, and create these experiences that like are completely different than your vanilla Minecraft experience. And that's really what like makes Minecraft great, and what made Minecraft great for like an NFT thing, right? Because everybody talks about like the metaverse and so forth, and at the end of the day, the biggest selling point of a metaverse, whatever, and there's many definitions on exactly what that is. It goes on the back of just creating like a solid community and experience with that community. And Minecraft was great in that sense. But
and it does feel like as you're talking about it too, right, that this does feel like a bit of press and their outward message that exists, right? Because absent that, what's missing from everything you're saying, right, of having kind of co-creation and and is the incentive system, right? The distributed incentive system. So it seems like either they're about to get their lunch eaten, right, at some point in the near future, or that's just their temporary party line until they realize they have to actively cannibalize their own business, right, and change their model completely, else somebody else is going to do it at the end of the day, right, with something that's equally cool, crowdsourced, et cetera, right? It's not easy, of course, to supplant 141 million people. That's not the easiest, I'm not suggesting, but over time, that's what will happen, right? Is if somebody is compensating the people who are creating all the value in the ecosystem, much like we've talked about with social media, or we've talked about with a whole variety of other use cases, that's where people are going to go because they want to get paid for their work and their effort, right? Am I missing something?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely hitting it there. I generally think it's more on PR aspect and them not looking bad than anything else. Yeah. Like, like we said earlier, the traditional gamers hate NFTs, right? And a lot of traditional gamers play Minecraft.
So they have to go with it.
Traditional game. And, some NFT Minecraft thing pops up. It has a lot of Ponzi-nomics taking advantage of players, so forth. And, I don't think they want to be a part of that bad PR.
Yeah. You know what I'm saying? It's a time thing. It's like, it's no different than the streamers you're talking about, right? Which is their audience is also probably traditional gamers, whatever. And so they don't want to have the tarnish of what they're interpreting Web3 to be or NFTs to be. And so for now, they're very, very anti. But as soon as that changes, as soon as security gets built up, as soon as, smart contracts are better, as soon as anything, right, that's probably going to change pretty fast.
Potentially, yeah. I think eventually, there's a good chance that, most of AAA studios will have their hands in NFTs one way or another. But it's still really early, and it's kind of hard to say. So,
I mean, they don't have the threat yet, right? There is no amazing quality game like you suggested from every vantage point that also has the NFT component integrated into it. Like, it doesn't exist yet, right? So
yeah, and for some games, it doesn't provide any value component whatsoever.
Right. So let's maybe use that to segue in. I know we have like a few minutes left. If everybody's okay with it, we're just going to go a little bit over. Peerless, you good with that too? If we go a little bit over right now?
Yeah, I mean, this is a topic I can talk about for hours. So, yeah.
I'm not sure we'll get hours out of everyone, but at least we'll get some minutes, if nothing else, and hit on some of the questions, that the audience is asking in here. But, what I want to do is like maybe break apart in segments just how you're thinking about the games that we've seen so far, right? So like, how do we categorize Big Time versus GOG versus EtherOrcs versus Axie? And then other people in here are asking about, other side is something Gala Games, which of course has a suite of games. Like, how do you think about that in your mind in terms of how do you categorize those games? How do you think through that from a player's side of things, but also from an investor's side of things as well?
Yeah, I kind of already talked about it a little bit, but I can make some like kind of distinctions. So you have your passive earning model. And generally speaking, those games don't necessarily have to be a game per se or good at all. So when I, usually like a stake to earn kind of thing, you set it, forget it, you're earning over time. EtherOrcs is a good example. And very other games like that, and somewhat similar, but not necessarily similar to DeFi Kingdoms. Just games designed to kind of create like a little twist on, investing in crypto and so forth. And I would put all of those in like the same bucket in the sense that like they attract your average like NFT / crypto investor. And most of that bucket, like most of those people are not gamers. Like they're not going to invest in the project if it requires active play. Right? Yep. So, a game where like maybe you pick it up for like 10, 20, 30 minutes a day, and then the rest of the time it's passive and so forth. I think, it's great for most people, right? In the NFT / crypto space. And then you have like those different type of like that free to play and play to earn model, right? Where like the game is completely free. You don't need to throw anything at it, but then there's also some earning aspect to it. And then you have, your like pay to win kind of thing. So those were like probably like the three main buckets I would categorize games in. And then there's a lot of like intermixing there as well. I think a good tokenomics and game economics in Web3 would be something similar to what Ember Sword is trying to do. And if you guys don't know what Ember Sword is or how their economic model works, essentially there are I think it's a good marriage of like NFT investors and people just wanting to play a game. So the game is going to be free to play. There's also an investing aspect. So like, you know, it's kind of like an open world game, like MMO, but people can own like the cities and the land within the game, but you don't need to own it to play the game. So the people who are like actually really like earning well are like those landowners, and and then, you know, there's still some earning aspect if you're just playing the game. And I think that's a really good marriage, because you have a game that appeases your like passive earning model as well as that free to play model, and it hits a lot of different angles. And just because you're not a landowner does not detract from that gameplay experience. So I think that's like, you know, in my opinion, that's what I like to see from that's what I like to see from Web3 gaming.
That makes sense.
Is a way like, I want to see Web3 gaming studios make strong distinctions between investors and players. I'd like to kind of think of Sandbox. I feel like they're somewhat similar, where they're more of a tool for other studios to create their game or their experience. It doesn't necessarily need to be a game. And I think with these type of ecosystems, I think it's kind of like it's the first person, like the first who to do it right is it's going to be crazy. Like I think once we see one of these ecosystems just like hit that recipe and it's mass adopted, and a lot of like big studios start using it, it's going to be insane, and you're going to want to be in it. But I feel like there's a few, right, that are trying to do that similar kind of thing, and I think, you know, some of these are going to die off and not exist. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of like your general like VC fund, right? I mean, they throw money at a bunch of stuff and hopefully something sticks.
Yep.
So I think one of them will eventually do extremely well, and you know, Gala Game's definitely at the top of my list.
You can't hold the Peerless down with just one word. He's a far more complex and smart gentleman than just one word does justice, it sounds like. No Rorschach tests around here either. Other Side is coming up a lot, Peerless.
Yeah, I see that.
Thoughts on Other Side, and you expect it to have a P2E aspect to it. And then I guess God Hates NFTs also goes on to say, a friend described Other Side as the Apple Store of gaming. Does that hold? So a couple of questions in there, I guess, all about what do you think? How do you perceive Other Side? And what do you think it's going to do?
I mean, just like not even analyzing the game whatsoever, it, generally speaking, at least initially, it's gonna do well with the hype alone and the people behind it. It's just designed to do well, at least initially.
Yep.
To look further into it, I mean, I wouldn't even bother, to be honest, until we see like some detailed tokenomics white papers and so forth. But I think it's safe to say that it'll probably do very well initially. Whether it'll do well over time, I mean, that's hard to say. But
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely has the setup for success. I mean, there's no denying it. I haven't even bothered like digging deep into it, and I really don't bother too much digging super deep into games until I see like more detail on economics and so forth, because that's why we're investing in it, right? Like, it's really dangerous to invest in anything if you don't understand what that ROI is. I feel like you gotta treat play to earn differently than your PFP project. Like, because generally speaking, people are gonna stick with like, how many tokens am I gaining per day, and what does that look like, and so forth.
No, I mean, it used to be we could just like, fire blindly and it would be pretty okay, right? But it's obviously not there anymore, right? Because then you get into big time land sale number 2, things like that, and then you're just not in good shape at that point, right?
Yeah, it's dangerous. It's dangerous territory for sure. So you have to tread carefully. So I don't like. I rarely would ever invest in any Web3 game early unless I see some like solid, like some companies, like for example, Phantom Galaxies, like they already had something there before they even started marketing the game. That's what I like to see, because most of these like Other Side, Imposters, stuff like this, they're so stupid early that like if you're holding, like, man, it's gonna take you a long ass time to get that ROI that makes sense versus just like throwing that money into a flip. Like, it's
with the uncertainty also, right? Like, even if you thought you were going to get there, like the risk that there's some issue that comes up along the way. I mean, both you and I experienced that at some point with like guilt.
The issue with buying into any Web3 gaming thing right now is time. Like, the vast majority of what people are buying into is not going to be ready to ship for years.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm all set on that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess relatedly, the opposite side of that is what EQ asks, which is, do you think we'll start seeing AAA gaming studios creating games to add blockchain and crypto in the next year or later? So I guess it's a time horizon question. Like, when do you think, Microsoft in this case with Minecraft, or whomever, is going to flip the script on what they're actually saying, right, about NFTs are bad and all that good stuff, and turn it over into incorporating blockchain and crypto in? What's your best guess?
Yeah, I mean, there are already AAA studios that talked about it. Square Enix has mentioned it. Ubisoft. What other studio that comes to mind? I'm drawing a blank here, but there are already some AAA studios that have publicly said, "Hey, like, we are going to do NFT gaming."
Yeah.
You have Epic Games. Yes, Epic Games for sure. So a lot of like so going back to like Twitch streams and stuff, some of you may or may not know who like Dr. Disrespect is, I guess. So he's created a studio called Midnight Society, and their game is going to be released on Epic Games. And the reason being is like Steam, they like half a year ago they updated their TOS to be like, hey, we're not accepting any games related to NFTs. But Epic Games has a completely different stance on it. So, any sort of like half decent sized studio that's trying to create an NFT game, Epic Games is like a really good marriage there. So you're going to see a lot of NFT games pop up on like the Epic Games Store.
Yeah. And there was that point also, right, where we saw, games coming out nonstop, and, Ubisoft was listed as, a strategic or an investor on like game after game, such that I remember at one point it was like, it didn't mean anything anymore. It was like, some influencers endorsing projects where it like lost steam at some point. So you're like, well, they're just backing everything, right? They're doing spray and pray. So it doesn't mean anything anymore. So yeah. So another question is, what games are, and by the way, we might have to do a follow-up here, because I still have a lot of questions left. I'm sure others do too. So maybe what happens is we let this simmer a little bit as we take our international journey, and then come back and scoop you up in Portugal, and we'll talk about gaming again at some point. But maybe one other question before we kind of wrap today is, what games are you hyped for that either released already or are upcoming? So is there anything you heard Big Time? I know that Big Time's on your radar. Anything else come to mind?
Yeah, I mean several. And I've talked a lot about some games already, and I just want to preface this one other time, and pretty much any game that I see, it's like, hey, this looks like a great game, and the studio is making a distinction between players and investors, are like top two signals for me. Like, first, the game needs to be good. Like, that's number one, like, period. And then number two is like, hey, are they going to give a shit about me spending money on their game? Or they're just going to be like, whatever, we don't care. We just care about growth. So those are going to be the two very distinctive things. So a couple games that come to mind when paying attention to those two things are Phantom Galaxies and Heroes of Mavia. I think more so Heroes of Mavia than anything else. One other aspect that I mentioned that would compete with like maybe the top three things you want to look for in NFT games is accessibility. And, an NFT game that's going to be available to be played on mobile is going to be at the top of the list. You want the game to be as accessible as possible. So Heroes of Mavia is that game. And it's also copying like Clash of Clans, which is like one of the most popular mobile games ever to be released. And then they had like their 10,000 land sale, right? And originally the game was only you could only play the game if you had land, right? But they changed their model to be, hey, we're going to create a free-to-play experience, a free-to-play game. And then if you're a landholder, like you're the one like you're actually earning kind of deal. Whereas if you're playing the free-to-play game, you're not really earning, but maybe you are if you do really well on like leaderboards and so forth. And when I saw that news, it made me even more bullish on the game. And the reason why they did that was what they could have done was like released a bunch more land, right? But they didn't do that. Because like for a game to be successful, it needs to have a lot of players, period. And in order for them to not constrict the game, right, to those 10,000 land owners, they needed more players, and the best way to do that was what they did instead of like, hey, we're just going to release a bunch more land like Big Time did.
Yeah.
So and that just goes to show that they're like, oh, like, we care about like our original investors, and we're not going to deflate the value of this land, at least not yet, at least not until there's more demand. So and then I've written some deep dive articles on both Mavia and Phantom Galaxies. I'm not going to go too depth into Phantom Galaxies. Somewhat similar reasons, not as much. I feel like as a game, like what I'm more excited to play is Phantom Galaxies, just because it looks cooler, I guess. But what I'm more excited to maybe invest into would be Heroes of Mavia, which I'm already heavily invested in. Just it's an FYI in both games.
That makes sense. That makes sense. We're going to have to do a follow-up here, by the way, because you remember a while back, like in DMs, like you and I were chatting about criteria and a variety of things. I think what'll be interesting about a follow-up is at some point, I actually had like a very detailed matrix with criteria in terms of like how to assess games. And so maybe in the next call, we take your perspective where, you of course have more gaming experience and have your own approach in terms of how you're thinking about these. And then I can give like another perspective on like how I was dissecting it and like the criteria and scoring and all that good stuff. And have some fun with that too, actually, with an update too. So, but this has been, I just want to be cognizant of time today. And this has been absolutely awesome.
I just want to make one last like closing remark for anybody listening in. I think investing in Web3 is riskier than your traditional NFT project, for sure. But you can still do really well, especially if you're set up with like maybe if you have a virtual assistant that's helping you get some whitelists and stuff. Maybe like, hey, play this game for me for a little bit, like with the and we can talk about that later with like guilds and scholars and so forth. I mean, there's a lot of other topics that go into like NFT gaming and how to profit from it, but just be extremely cautious when buying into NFT games. I mean, if the project's hype, it's hype, but generally speaking, most of these play to earn projects, their value will go down over time until the game's released.
I mean, to that point, if Legends of Inari becomes the next Axie Infinity, I'm going to be rich, is what's going to wind up happening. So maybe that happens between now. Maybe that happens between now and the next episode that you and I have on this. But otherwise, really, really awesome discussion today. Like really thoughtful, Peerless. Thank you for sharing so much about what you're thinking and how you're approaching things. For everybody that listened in, of course, thanks so much for joining. Thanks for your questions, like always. Much appreciated. Next week, we're going to start to even ramp up even more with, we're certainly on Spotify now. We're going to have better audio at some point to make up for my audio and technical deficiencies. So that's going to be improving soon. So we're going to be rising. It's going to get exciting and spicy. So we'll see everyone same time next week. We're going to be going international again, I believe, starting next week. And yeah, we'll have Peerless on again too. So, and Peerless, thanks again for joining as well. Much appreciated.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, everyone. Well, thanks for the questions. And like always, we'll see everybody in VC1.